most people abroad who are not Polish don't read Polish. So there was a Polish literature that was kind of self-contained in Poland. And then there was a kind of Jewish historical literature that, at least during the communist period, it didn't really, there was no engagement between these two. And so solidified in these two historical literatures were two diametrically opposite views. So that's where I came in and decided to go to archives to begin a book project, which would involve going to archives in 5 different countries, reading all the secondary sources, uncovering all existing archival sources, interviewing Polish resistance fighters who were still living, and Holocaust survivors who had fought with the Home Army or in some ways engaged the Home Army, and tried to piece together this full story, right? And the idea was leave no stones unturned, and that we should base our conclusions exclusively and solely on evidence. The idea is kind of like reason without passion, right? Free of passion, which is try to put aside prejudices and perceptions and save all those for revisiting them after you've uncovered all the evidence. And when I went through the evidence, what I found was an extraordinary complexity of views and experiences. In other words, there was no one single experience at all. So let me actually start this lecture. I'm going to read a little bit from something that I wrote, which is kind of going over these various sides, which is parts of the Polish underground that helped Jews and saved Jews, many of whom were awarded righteous among the nations. Some famous members of the Polish underground, like Jan Karski, who often in the West and in the English-speaking world, there's no knowledge that he was involved in the Polish Home Army or underground, or people or heroic figures like Irena Sendler, the head of the children's section of Żegota. And yet, on the other hand, we will look at several cases of Home Army members who committed crimes against the Jews, such as Adolf Pilk, for example, and such as the Home Army District Commander of Białystok and Nowogródek. So we have those cases, and I'll try to, and in my book I try to look at all the variety and cluster of factors that help explain this. And one will be geography. I'll show that there's very different orientations based on what part of pre-war Poland we're speaking about. And especially those on the Polish-Soviet border in the Northeast have a much more hostile orientation towards the Jews versus diametrically opposite cases like near Lvov, where we have Home Army units literally engaging in the rescue of whole Jewish communities. So let me just begin there. So I will start by saying this, that until very recently, our understanding of the Polish underground's wartime record was overwhelmingly negative. And I'm speaking about our understanding in the West, meaning in the English-speaking world. But I would say also that applies to French-speaking world, of course, in Hebrew literature and so forth, but in general in the West. Now, Holocaust survivors, survivor testimony and scholarly studies in the West until very recently argued that partisans of the Home Army, those clandestine forces in Nazi-occupied Poland loyal to the Polish government in exile, were just as dangerous to Jews as were the Nazis. And the specific cases on which these claims were made were no doubt accurate. But as I will argue, they are incomplete because they don't take into account other stories where we have different outcomes. That's to say, Jews helped by, saved by, or participating in the Polish underground. And like I said about, when I started this research, at least in the English-speaking world, those cases were not brought to light in the English language literature. That's why, perhaps that's where I get the emphasis on those to punctuate that kind of theme for the English-speaking world that doesn't know, is not really familiar with those stories. Now, new research, however, demonstrates there was another side to the story of the Polish underground. In my book, The Polish Underground and the Jews, 1939 to 1945, I show that alongside documented cases of crimes against the Jews by members of the Home Army and underground, individuals and groups within the Polish underground played more of a role in aiding Jews than was previously known in the English-speaking world. Now, to be sure, Polish scholars between the 1960s and 1990s had already documented cases of righteous Gentiles within the Polish underground, but in works that entirely excluded anti-Jewish acts or anti-Jewish views from the historical record. So in the inverse case, so in my case where I'm speaking about in the English-speaking world and in English language scholarship, up to very recently, we only heard of hostility on the part of the Polish underground and Home Army and crimes against the Jews, whereas on this flip side, inside Poland and within that Polish literature until let's say from about 2005 to the present, up until then, we heard only and exclusively about righteous Gentiles within the Home Army. And so my point in my scholarly work was to provide a kind of bridge to say, let's look at all these figures without agenda, all these documents and evidence, and then let's conclude based on that so we can make it more of a nuanced understanding. Now, the Polish underground itself grew and evolved considerably throughout the war. And this is a critical aspect of my argument, growing numerically and spreading by 1942 to all parts of pre-war Poland. By December 1940, the main structure of the was established with civilian, military, and political branches. I'm going to now move to this part to show the main structure of the underground. Here we go, looking at our political, civilian, and military wing of the Polish underground. Now, the highest official in the underground was the government delegate. I just want to show you here, was the government delegate who presided over the delegates bureau, consisting of departments that were intended upon liberation to function as a provisional government. Now, the military wing, the Home Army, called until February 1942, the Union of Armed Forces, was headed by a commander in Warsaw who swore allegiance, and I'm just going to, let's go to that commander, who swore allegiance to the Polish prime minister and government in exile in London. Now, in June 1940, General Stefan Rowiecki was named Home Army commander, a post he held until his capture in June 1943 and eventually his execution. In 1942, the Home Army adopted an emblem. Let me just go to the emblem. An emblem that became the powerful symbol of resistance in occupied Poland. In its Bureau of Information and Propaganda, produced 1/5 of all clandestine newspapers in occupied Poland, including the Home Army's central organ, Bulletin Informacyjny, the largest circulation underground paper in occupied Poland that was in circulation literally between 1939 and the end of the war. It's one of 3 clandestine periodicals that operated continuously throughout the war, of about 1,200 titles. Now, in 1942, both the Home Army and the Delegates Bureau established a Jewish aid division. So I'd like to just try to show you within this structure of the underground, where is this Jewish aid division? Just so you can see. Here is, you'll see here is the underground, and here is the Jewish Affairs Bureau. It is part of the 6th Department, Bureau of Information and Propaganda, and here is where it falls within that structure. Now, it was the attorney, Henryk Wolinski. It was the attorney, Henryk Wolinski, a colonel in the Polish Armia Krajowa, who established its Jewish Affairs Bureau in February 1942. The intelligence he gathered on Nazi crimes against the Jews was delivered to the Home Army's central headquarters in Warsaw. Now, the commander of the Home Army, General Rowecki, passed these records to secret couriers who brought them to London with cover letters vouching for their accuracy. As the shocking materials arrived in London, the Polish government in exile leaked documents to the Western media. The result was that the New York Times and the Times of London informed the world in June 1942 about Nazi death camps and the use of gas for Hitler's insane plan for the annihilation of European Jewry. In November 1942, the celebrated Home Army courier, Jan Karski, let me just, I want to just talk about this particular, we'll go here first, sorry. The celebrated Home Army courier, Jan Karski, arrived in London to deliver firsthand news about the Holocaust to the world. The Polish underground leadership thus became the first to receive and disseminate to the free world news on the emerging Nazis' final solution to the Jewish question. And again, I think this is part of the whole story of the complicated story of the Polish underground, which is their pretty critical and central role in disseminating information about the Holocaust. Remember, it was couriers of this underground that allowed Jewish leadership in occupied Poland to disseminate reports and documents to their co-religionists in the West. Now, I'd like to just look at this really extraordinary document, and that is that in December 1942, the Polish government in exile appealed to the world to intervene militarily on behalf of Polish Jewry at a meeting of the United Nations. This pamphlet was distributed in English. You can see here, it's a document written or produced, published by the Republic of Poland, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with materials from the Jewish Affairs Bureau of the Home Army, which were collections of testimonies from Jews in towns that were destroyed. Okay, now meanwhile, in occupied Poland, Wolinski took the organizational initiative for establishing Żegota, the Polish underground committee to aid the Jews. Now, Wolinski also served as liaison between the Jewish resistance in the Warsaw Ghetto and the Home Army, effectively persuading the Home Army commander, General Rowecki, to order the transfer of arms, ammunition, and explosives materials into the Warsaw Ghetto prior to the uprising. Now, in February 1943, moreover, Rowecki issued an order to district commanders to provide military aid to Jews inside ghettos wishing to mount self-defense. And on the first day of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, he ordered the Warsaw District Home Army chief to carry out a mission to blow up the ghetto walls to allow for mass escape. I'm just going to move on to this slide. Now, the mission was assigned to Captain Józef Pszeny, shown here in this slide, at 6:20 p.m. on April 19th, 1943, the first day, Erev Pesach, right, of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Captain Pszeny led his unit towards the outskirts of the ghetto wall with a 63-kilogram explosive device. But before reaching the wall, a group of Polish blue police spotted them, alerted the local Gestapo, and a heavy exchange of gunfire took place. 3 German gendarmes and 2 Polish blue police were killed, according to the sources. 2 of Pszeny's soldiers, Józef Wilk and Eugeniusz Morawski, were killed, and 4 were wounded. 8 minutes after the operation began, Captain Pszeny ordered his troops to retreat with the dead and wounded. Now, the Home Army commander, in fact, had already been regularly informing London about German crimes against the Jews. In January 1941, for example, he cabled the Polish government in exile in London about the horrific conditions of the treatment of Jews in the newly created Warsaw Ghetto. And you could sense from these reports when you read them, the sense of utter urgency, the utter actual shock. You can read that, it leaps off the page. Now in April 1942, for example, Revetsky warned London that, and I'm quoting from a report that he sent via courier, quote, everywhere mass executions and shootings of Jews are taking place, unquote. His sympathy for the Jews found expression in the Home Army's central organ, Bulletin Informatione. Now, after the first death camp for Jews began operating in Belzec in March 1942, the clandestine paper's powerful voice was unmistaken, meaning the Bulletin Informatione, quote. And let me just excerpt from you a quote from Bulletin Informatione, their first reaction to news about Belzec, the extermination camp for Jews. Quote, the extermination of the Jews is, in the literal sense of the word, now taking place, the paper stated on April 30th, 1942. Quote, while the initiator is Hitler, we cannot close our eyes to the fact that these crimes have taken such monstrous form only because of the people ready and willing to carry out Hitler's intentions. The sea of blood will be an eternal blot on the German nation, unquote. When the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising broke out, 1 year later, a Home Army paper stated, quote, these beasts in human form have lapped up their fill of Jewish blood and will wash their victory down in the pubs of Warsaw. That's from April 25th, 1943. Now, the Home Army's coverage of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was considered vital enough that the New York Times did a story about that particular paper. I wanted just to show you this here, that in September 1943, the New York Times here reprinted the cover of the Home Army Central of the Home Army paper. You'll see here, it's the most famous piece written by the editor-in-chief of the paper, Ostatni akt wielkiej tragedii here. And you see from the New York Times looking at, so it's not only about what just took place in Warsaw, the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto, but also about this coverage and this particular paper and its sympathetic view, and it's kind of like the, I guess you can say that kind of the moral power of its voice. Now more and more attitude has lately been paid to Irena Sendler. So let's go. One of the Polish underground's most celebrated figures. Now, we can say head of the children's section of Żegota. Now, Irena created this, she was credited with saving, and now we think about 300 to 350 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto, and was shortlisted for a Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, 1 year before she passed away. Now, her network of collaborators included the 32-year-old Jadwiga Deneko. In 1942, Deneko brought children smuggled from the Warsaw Ghetto to safe houses in Warsaw, placing each in convents and orphanages after securing the necessary sets of false papers. One of the Jewish children Deneko saved was Katajina Melak. And so I want to just, this is Katajina Melak. You can see her here, the one with flowers in her hair, was 10-year-old Katajina Melak in August 1942 when Deneko rescued her from the Warsaw Ghetto. Now, Katarzyna stayed in Deneko's apartment for several weeks before a fake birth certificate was obtained. Deneko then arranged for the young girl to stay at the Catholic convent in Turkowice. And that's what we're seeing here in this slide. Now, Katarzyna survived the war and later commented that, quote, Not only did Deneko arrange for my false birth certificate, which was my armor and my savior, but she kept in contact with me when I was in Turkovice. She wrote me letters and sent me care packages, unquote. At one point, Deneko wrote the convent a letter asking them to change Katarzyna's location. Deneko feared that if she was captured and tortured, that she might give up Katarzyna's whereabouts. Now, the nuns decided to keep Katarzyna, but to remove her from the records of children staying there. When the Gestapo captured Deneko on November 25th, 1943, she was hiding over 10 Jewish children. Imprisoned and tortured, the Gestapo failed to extract from her the name of a single hidden child. Jadwiga Deneko was executed by firing squad at the Pawiak prison in Warsaw on January 8th, 1944, at the age of 32. Again, one of these extraordinary heroes. It's hard not to get emotional even when you speak about her. To say an extraordinary kind of personal story about this particular case is that in 2014, I had in my class at Yeshiva University something unusual for the time, which is I had a student from Poland. Because I teach at a university that's the flagship institution of modern Orthodoxy in the United States, these students tend to be religious, almost exclusively religious Jews, right? So it was unusual to have a student from Poland. And as he was in my Holocaust class, and when I came to this subject of my course, he raised his hand, and it's at that moment that he explained that he is the grandson of this extraordinary figure, Katajina Melak, and that she was at the time 81, and that he's still in touch with her. And it was quite an extraordinary kind of circle, which as this was 2014. My book wasn't out yet, but I just finished writing about her. So that was really an extraordinary thing to see the her grandson in my class, who of course probably would never have existed if it were not for Jadwiga Deneko. So let me just say more about Irena Sendler, because her collaborators also included Jadwiga Piotrowska, who used her Warsaw home as a safe house for hundreds of Jewish children smuggled out of the Warsaw Ghetto. Now, her success in saving so many children was in part due to her close collaboration with Jan Dobroczynski, a social worker who ran the division on abandoned children in Warsaw's social welfare department. Now, a member of the Home Army, Dobroczynski forged documents for Jewish children stating that they were Catholic orphans. He applied the department's official stamp and his own signature to each document. Now, despite the dangers, Dobroczynski worked with Piotrowska to place over 200 Jewish children in orphanages and convents. Piotrowska and Dobroczynski were not isolated figures, but were joined and supported by many others within the Polish Underground's organization, Żydota. Now, as Konstanta Gebert of Gazeta Wyborcza recently commented, quote, aid to the Jews became one of the Polish Underground's missions during the course of the war, even if it was inconsistently applied, unquote. I thought that was kind of a brilliant thing that the way that he characterized that. Now, in the ranks of the Home Army, there were local leaders involved in aiding Jews as well. For example, let's go to here. In the village of Hanachu, located in the province of Lvov, the local Home Army commander, Lieutenant Kazimierz Wojtowicz, ordered residents to build bunkers on their farms in which to hide Jews. Now, Lieutenant Wojtowicz also sanctioned the formation of a Jewish self-defense unit under Home Army control, providing weapons, ammunition, and training. So I'd like everybody, if you can, to look at this particular picture. It's something that I think is extraordinary. It is the Home Army Jewish unit. I'm sorry, the Jewish unit of the Home Army of Hanachu. Now, as the situation of the Jews deteriorated, Lieutenant Wojtowicz issued an order to the local population in September 1942 to help Jews in any way possible. When, in April 1944, German police and their Ukrainian helpers attacked Hanachu to ferret out the Jews, Lieutenant Wojtowicz ordered his men to evacuate the entire population to a nearby village. A German SS division that entered and was met with stiff resistance from the Home Army and its Jewish platoon was held at bay for enough time to evacuate most of the Jews. It is now believed that of the 250 Jews hiding in Hanachu, 180 survived. Now, one could also include the quiet and reserved Henryk Pochowski, a lieutenant in the Lvov District Home Army. Now, while serving as head of the region's counterintelligence, Pochowski became involved in Jewish aid work in spring 1943. In unpublished memoirs at the Institute of History of the Polish Academy of Sciences in Warsaw, Pochowski discusses his work finding shelter for Jews escaped from the Lvov ghetto. Now, in his own home, Lieutenant Pochowski hid a Jewish man until the end of the war. When a local Polish resident discovered Pochowski's secret and tried to blackmail him, he appealed to the underground court that prosecuted collaborators. Now, let me just read from, this is just an excerpt from his unpublished memoirs. Quote, the blackmailer was killed on the streets of Lvov in broad daylight. We had no mercy for such anthropoid hyenas, unquote. Now, I discovered a number of cases of local Home Army members risking their lives to save Jews. In Vilna, for example, there is the extraordinary case of Bronisław Krzyżanowski and his wife Helena. Now, Krzyżanowski used Home Army resources to provide false papers and house several Jewish families in the Vilna ghetto, who he was able to get out of the Vilna ghetto. Now, one of these was the family of Eliash Baran, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with because it's been widely reported on in Poland. A young Polish Jew, here's Eliash Baran and his 5-year-old son, a young Polish Jew whom Krzyżanowski knew from before the war. Eliash fled the ghetto and joined Krzyżanowski's Home Army unit, tragically falling in battle in November 1942. But before Eliash Baran's death, Krzyżanowski had arranged for Baran's wife and 5-year-old son, this is his 5-year-old son, whose name was Włodek, to be smuggled out of the ghetto and stay at his country home. And here's a map of the Krzyżanowski's country home. This is from my book. You'll see that their country home, here's Vilna, was outside here, and there he was able to place Włodek Baran, his mother, and then his mother, who happened to be pregnant and gave birth to the second child, and they were able to survive the war that way. Now today, Włodek Baran, whose name is Zev, because he and his mother and brother moved to Palestine and then Israel after the war. Today, he serves as honorary consul of the Republic of Poland in Jerusalem. Now what I'd like to do for the sake of time is I'm going to move to another part of, there are more cases of aid, but now I'm going to go switch to that other side of the story. What cases do we know of, and what is the dimension of individuals in the Polish Home Army and underground who worked to either either inform on Jews, to blackmail Jews, or even to kill them. Now, or murder them. Now, it was in part, I would say, an accident of history. I'm going to move on here. Oh, this was an example of the fake, the fake papers that were created for Elias Baran's wife here and son, Wodek Baran. This is in the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Okay, so I'm going to move on because you see there were many others, but we don't have time for that. So we're going to go to here. Okay, so what I want to say is now we're going to move to this. Now, it was in part an accident of personality that resulted in the marked deterioration in relations between the Polish underground and the Jews. In June 1943, the Gestapo, as I mentioned, had captured Home Army Commander General Robecki, who was replaced by General Tadeusz Komorowski, shown here. Now, a sympathizer with the right-wing, or we can say with the populist anti-Semitic National Party, the Endecja, General Komorowski reversed the policies of his predecessor, refusing to provide aid to Jews in ghettos wishing to mount self-defense. He also favored the exclusion of Jews from the ranks of the Home Army. I'm saying that not just by testimony, but by documents that I found. Now, with a chilling indifference, General Komorowski characterized Jewish partisans in the eastern borderlands as communist pro-Soviet elements, as an attitude that gave local Home Army units a green light to treat Jews any way they wished. In fact, documents trace 2 orders by the Home Army commander to attack Jewish partisans in the Novogrudek district back in the Novogrudek district. In other words, he signed the document. Now, his well-known report from August 1943 on combating banditry in the countryside revealed a striking lack of understanding for the tragic predicament of the Jews. Who were trying to survive as partisans. Now, what's more, General Komorowski decided in March 1944 to incorporate into the Home Army a large section of the openly anti-Semitic National Armed Forces, NSZ, an extreme right-wing organization that characterized communists, Jews, and Soviets as Poland's principal enemy, not the Germans. Now, the second half of 1943 and 1944 witnessed a rise in anti-Jewish activity of local Home Army units. The new hostile face of the Home Army was reflected in the figure of Colonel Władysław Liniarski, commander of the Białystok Home Army, District Home Army. On July 30th, 1943, Liniarski ordered his sub-district commanders, quote, to liquidate at once with total ruthlessness Polish spies, communists, and Jewish communist bands. In December 1943, after the liquidation of the Białystok ghetto, he shockingly wrote in an internal report, quote, the absence of Jews in trade in the Białystok district is a true blessing, unquote. This is after the complete destruction of Białystok Jewry. Now, perhaps the most hostile section of the Home Army was in the northeast district of Novogrudek. Here is a map of the Novogrudek district, and here is the Soviet-Polish border. Now, this was a region that Soviet Russia regarded as Russian territory, and where Soviet partisans were numerous beginning in the second half of 1943. Now, the Novogrudek District Home Army commander, Colonel Janusz Szlachty, regarded Jews as hostile Soviet elements. Novogrudek, for example, was 82% rural and one of the most backward areas of pre-war Poland. Jewish testimonies from the region confirm that the Novogrudok District Home Army refused to accept Jews based on the argument that Jews had supported Russia during the Soviet invasion of 1939. Now, in September 1943, Colonel Schlosky noted in a monthly report that he had ordered a sub-district unit to, quote, cleanse, unquote, a local forest of what he called Soviet Jewish bands, in other words, Jews. Now, an important source on the Novogrudok District Home Army is the late Abraham Melizin. Now, a Polish Jew from Vilna who served as an officer in the local Home Army, posing as a Catholic with fake papers. Now, upon his death in 2008, at the age of 98, Melizin left his unpublished autobiography to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research in New York. In his memoirs, Melizin referred to Colonel Schlosky as an extreme anti-Semite who did nothing to curb anti-Jewish actions among his own rank and file. Melizin also commented on chance conversations he had with locals in the city of Lida. And I found this is important that he left in this in my memoir. So he is posing as a Catholic Pole, a member of the underground, and he encountered this gentleman in Lida. And this is what he wrote, quote, "In my accidental encounters with people in the nearby, in Lida itself, almost everyone expressed satisfaction that the Germans got rid of the Jews. The majority did not approve of murder, but their isolation in the ghetto was taken as a good move by the Germans," unquote. In other words, he's saying the vast majority in Lida and the surrounding areas felt that it was a very good move on the Germans' part to put Jews inside walled ghettos. Now, Melizin recounted his meeting with the notorious figure, Lieutenant Adolf Pilk. Now, Pilk had parachuted into occupied Poland from London in February 1943. He was assigned to the Novogrudok district to help organize the local Home Army. Now, when Melizin met Pilk in Lida, Pilk declared that his mission was, and this is what was recorded in this exchange, quote, "the struggle against the Żydokomuna," unquote. So in other words, he came in from London, parachuted into Novogrudok, and he said his mission was not to fight the Germans, but, quote, "the Judeo-communists." That was his mission. Now, eventually, Pilk was made commander of the 78th Home Army Infantry Regiment in the town of Stopsa. I'll just here. You can see where that is here, in the town of Stopsa near the Naliboki Forest, where the Bielski brothers had created their family camp. In January 1944, Pilk signed a notorious ceasefire agreement with the local Germans in exchange for weapons that he then used to combat Jewish partisans and Soviet partisans. Now, in one record, Pilk recounted the following. And now I'm just reading from an internal report that Pilk sent to the district commander of Novogrudok. Quote, "On September 17th, 1943, a squadron that was in the area encountered a group of Jewish partisans, pillagers, who were ruthlessly plundering a village. The squadron leader our squadron leader apprehended the Jewish partisans, disarmed them, and then began to bring them to a camp some 25 kilometers away. The Jews tried to escape. They were shot and discarded on the side of a road." That's what we have there. Now, open expressions of anti-Jewish hatred could also be found in local Home Army reports. For example, in Garvolen, a town of less than 10,000 inhabitants in the Warsaw district, the Warsaw Region Home Army commander, General Albin Skroczynski, filed a report in December 1943. It included 2 sentences on the Jews, and this is what he wrote, quote, "There is certain sympathy for the Jews. It is better, however, that they are no longer here." Quote. So again, I would say this represents his own personal opinion. Now, General Komorowski, who is much more lenient with extreme nationalists than his predecessor, also accepted into the Home Army the Kadra Strike Battalion under the command of Bolesław Piasecki. And I believe I have, no, I don't have, of Bolesław Piasecki. And I think everyone here knows that he was the leader of the Falange extremists before the war. Now, Piasecki was, according to the Polish scholar Szymon Rudnicki, a genuine Polish fascist. In 1935, Piasecki had founded the National Radical Camp. In 1937, his program called for stripping Jews of citizenship, expropriating their property, and issuing an order of expulsion, for example. Now, in October 1943, Piasecki's Kadra Strike Battalion, numbering approximately 1,600, was incorporated into the Home Army as the 3rd Battalion of the 77th Home Army Infantry Regiment in Novogródek. Now, the inclusion of Piasecki's 3rd Battalion in the Novogródek District Home Army intensified the climate of hostility towards the Jews. There is also evidence that General Komorowski sanctioned the use of Piasecki's and Pilk's units to strike Jewish partisans. In General Komorowski's organizational report number 240, covering the period September 1943 to February 1944, he wrote the following comments in the Novogródek district section, quote, and again, these are the words of General Komorowski, quote, "The highest priority in the Novogródek district is the display of self-defense in the face of hostile Soviet partisans and Jewish communist bands," unquote. Komorowski then noted that Piasecki's and Pilk's units were assigned to this task. So it gives you a sense. Now, in conclusion, we can say the following. The Home Army was an umbrella organization numbering over 300,000 men and women by 1944, with members drawn from all regions of pre-war Poland and from all social and political backgrounds, ranging from socialists and peasants to populists and nationalists. Its attitude and behavior towards the Jews during World War II thus varied widely from extraordinary acts of aid to acts of murder. Yet, in focusing, as we have done in the English language literature, on the crimes, we are in danger of forgetting that alongside documented cases of crimes, there were individuals and groups within the Polish underground that risked their lives to save numerous Jews. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję. Szanowni Państwo, szanowny Zimmerman, witam wszystkich serdecznie. Dziękuję za możliwość wzięcia udziału w seminarium. Profesorowi dziękuję też za zwięzłe przedstawienie głównych tez i problemów poruszonych w książce. Streścić ją w niespełna 40-45 minut jest to nie lada sztuka, ponieważ książka zawiera ponad 600 stron. Książka, której wydania polskiego byłam redaktorem naukowym, może, a zapewne budzi wśród czytelników wiele skrajnych emocji, co pokazują recenzje, które nawet przed naszym seminarium przejrzałam, zarówno angielskiego, jak i też polskiego wydania, opublikowane w językach angielskim, polskim, ale również rosyjskim. Chwilami też się zastanawiałam, czy właściwie właśnie ja to powinnam tutaj wystąpić. Jakby nie było, przyczyniłam się trochę, a może nawet w dużej mierze do powstania wydania polskiego. Najpierw rekomendując tą książkę koleżance z PWN, że warto ją wydać, a później, kiedy mnie poprosiła, podjęłam się redakcji naukowej polskiego wydania. Tutaj pozwolę sobie głównie odnieść się już nie do samego wystąpienia, ale też do książki. Książka ukazała się równo 3 lata temu. Właściwie chyba trwał jej druk, żeby zdążyć w przededniu na 75. rocznicę wybuchu powstania w getcie warszawskim, któremu poświęcony jest rozdział 8 pod tytułem Powstanie w getcie warszawskim, a Polskie Państwo Podziemne, gdzie, jak już wspomniał też profesor Zimmerman, została opisana współpraca Armii Krajowej z żydowską organizacją bojową i nieudana próba pomocy walczącym ze strony Armii Krajowej. O ile wokół wydania angielskiego odbyło się wiele spotkań z autorem, w przypadku polskiego, o ile się nie mylę, jest to pierwsze spotkanie z polskim czytelnikiem. Mam jednak nadzieję, że nie ostatnie. Profesor Zimmerman podjął się napisania syntezy obejmującej w kontekście kwestii żydowskiej złożone stosunki Polskiego Państwa Podziemnego i Żydów od pierwszych chwil II wojny światowej aż do jej zakończenia. Czytelnik, który zasiadając do lektury książki będzie się spodziewał obszernych opisów struktur Polskiego Państwa Podziemnego, może się zawieść, gdyż książka ta jest przede wszystkim o stosunkach czyli Polskiego Państwa Podziemnego, żydowskich i tak należy ją traktować. Jak zaznacza sam autor we wstępie do niej, starał się podczas pisania, cytuję, zachować obiektywizm, w tym dokonać ostrożnej i krytycznej oceny wszystkich źródeł. Koniec cytatu. Ten obiektywizm autora podkreślają niektórzy z recenzentów syntezy, jak również recenzentka wydawnicza, doktor habilitowana Jolanta Żyndul, z czym pozwolę również zgodzić się ja. Dodam, że oprócz pokazania czarnych i białych stron stosunków polsko-żydowskich na przykładzie stosunku Polskiego Państwa Podziemnego wobec Żydów, autor nie bał się pokazać również, że nie wszystko jest czarno-białe i jednoznaczne w ocenie, ale są również odcienie szarości w ocenie przedstawianych wydarzeń. W oparciu o liczne źródła przedstawił różne aspekty wspólnej egzystencji Żydów i Polaków, czyli członków Polskiego Państwa Podziemnego w czasach wojny. Przedstawił złożoność sytuacji w okupowanej Polsce i opisał zarówno przypadki niesienia pomocy Żydom przez polskie podziemie z narażeniem życia, jak i czarne karty, w tym prześladowania, denuncjacje i mordy na Żydach. Przy czym warto podkreślić, że on jako pierwszy nie potraktował tego tematu fragmentarycznie i pokazał go w całym okresie trwającej prawie 6 lat II wojny światowej. Dużą zaletą książki jest sposób narracji w niej. Profesor nie skupił się tylko na opisaniu dużych, centralnych ośrodków miejskich, takich jak Warszawa, za co mu bardzo dziękuję, ale też poświęcił dużo miejsca na kartach książki prowincji i osobom z nią związanych. Obok opisu aktywności działaczy członków Żegoty z Warszawy opisał mniej znaną działalność lokalnego oddziału Żegoty na przykładzie Lwowa, a w tym jej czołową postać Władysławę Larysę Chomsową. W wielu miejscach tak jest poprowadzona narracja, żeby to czytelnik sam wyciągnął wnioski i ocenił opisywaną sytuację. Autor używa do tego cytatów pochodzących ze źródeł. Zarówno jest to prasa konspiracyjna, jak i dokumenty archiwalne pochodzące z okresu II wojny światowej, czy wywiady przeprowadzone ze świadkami epoki. Niektórzy z czytelników i recenzentów uznają to jako zaletę pracy, gdy inni jako jej minus i przesycenie pracy cytatami ze źródeł. Ale o gustach nie należy dyskutować. Moim zdaniem jest to najlepszy zabieg, który umożliwia uniknięcie osądów o opisywanych osobach i wydarzeniach, a do głosu dopuszcza świadków tychże wydarzeń. Tutaj warto dodać, że autor przeprowadził kwerendy do książki w licznych archiwach znajdujących się w Stanach Zjednoczonych, Wielkiej Brytanii, Izraelu i Polsce oraz w bibliotekach, a także przeprowadził wywiady z członkami Armii Krajowej i ocalałymi z Holokaustu Żydami. Jeśli ktoś sprawdzi bibliografię na końcu książki, to jest ona bardzo bogata zarówno w archiwalia, jak i pozycje książkowe. W związku z tym, że jest to synteza, autor nie musiał i nie odkrywał nieznanego. Wręcz przeciwnie, wielokrotnie powoływał się na ustalenia i wyniki badań opublikowanych przez innych badaczy zajmujących się Polskim Państwem Podziemnym i zagładą Żydów. Tak jak w wielu syntezach, również tutaj niektórym wydarzeniom i osobom profesor poświęcił więcej miejsca, a innym mniej. W ostatnich latach na rynku wydawniczym pojawiło się sporo publikacji na temat stosunków polsko-żydowskich podczas II wojny światowej, o czym wspominał profesor, we wstępie do swojej książki, przedstawiając stan badań nad tym tematem. Co warto zaznaczyć, wielu z autorów swoje prace poświęciło pojedynczym zagadnieniom bądź przedstawiło wycinkowe wyniki badań. Nikt nie pokazał również po 2018 roku tak szerokiego, jak w prezentowanej tu książce, opisu wydarzeń na ten jakże trudny i złożony temat. Jak wspomniałam na początku, ale też wspomniał pan profesor, książka Polskie Państwo Podziemne i Żydzi w czasie II wojny światowej ukazała się po raz pierwszy w 2015 roku w Nowym Jorku. Natomiast polska wersja pracy różni się pod wieloma względami od jej pierwotnej. Jeszcze przed tłumaczeniem na język polski profesor zaktualizował angielski maszynopis. Jak już wspomniał, podczas prac nad redakcją tłumaczenia i opracowaniem polskojęzycznej wersji razem staraliśmy się dopasować książkę do polskiego czytelnika, jak i wyeliminować nieścisłości, które zdarzyły się w angielskim wydaniu. Czy nam się to w pełni udało? Niech oceni to czytelnik. Stąd niektóre aspekty zostały potraktowane bardziej skrótowo, na przykład opis losów Haliny Zawadzkiej. Pominęliśmy opisy geolokalizacji większości miejscowości w Polsce, uznając, że ich położenie na mapie dla polskiego czytelnika jest zbyt oczywiste. Prawie wszystkie cytaty z dokumentów, prasa, jak i archiwalia zawarte w tekście książki, wytworzone w języku polskim, zostały podane w oryginalnej wersji. Ostatnio nawet się zastanawiałam, czy w obecnej sytuacji, w dobie pandemii, byłoby możliwe wydanie zarówno angielskiej wersji książki, jak i nawet polskiego jej tłumaczenia przy tych ograniczeniach w dostępie do bibliotek i do archiwów. Do ostatniej chwili zaktualizowaliśmy informacje i dane na podstawie najnowszych opublikowanych wyników badań, na przykład informacje na temat Ireny Sendlerowej i liczby uratowanych przez nią dzieci z getta warszawskiego. Staraliśmy się też uwzględnić w przypisach publikacje naukowe związane z tematyką książki, które ukazały się już po 2015 roku. Do czytelników trafiła zmieniona wersja książki profesora Zimmermana, która jest przeznaczona przede wszystkim, ale nie tylko dla polskiego odbiorcy. Mam nadzieję, że jej polskie wydanie będzie odniesieniem, a nawet jest, do zastanej wiedzy i inspiracją dla dalszych badań nad stosunkami polsko-żydowskimi w czasie II wojny światowej, a także, co pozwolę sobie powtórzyć chociażby za profesorem Andrzejem Żbikowskim, tutaj cytuję, liczą na jej szeroki odzew i nieuniknione polemiki. Koniec cytatu. Tutaj dziękuję już za uwagę, jeśli chodzi o moje wystąpienie i korzystając z tego, że mam głos, chciałabym zadać pierwsze pytanie profesorowi. Nie będę ich zadawać zbyt wielu, chociaż miałam wypisanych kilka, ponieważ już są liczne pytania od publiczności. Chciałam zadać pierwsze pytanie takie. Skąd pomysł na tą książkę? Bo jest to temat bardzo złożony, trudny. Jest to synteza. I czy zaczynając pracę nad nią, zakładał pan, że badania będą trwały aż tak? Albo tylko około 9 lat. Dziękuję.
First of all, let me thank you to Professor Dr. Rusiniak-Karwat for the comments and also for her extraordinary work. Like she was saying, when I had the focus of Polish scholars on the English manuscript, they noticed certain issues or errors that they helped correct, and also updating some of the bibliography. And as she mentioned, that between 2015 and 2018, we had this extraordinary new biography of Irena Sendler that forced me to rewrite that section on the subject. Now, in terms of the two questions, which is how did the idea came up? And what it was is that I had finished writing, adapting my dissertation into a book. The dissertation was about relations between the PPS and the Jewish Labor Bund in Tsarist Russia, which I wrote under Dr. Antony Polskie at Brandeis University. Then I revised it into a book. And as that manuscript when it was completed, I was thinking of future projects. And so I have to credit Professor Polskie, because I had a discussion with him. He's like, you know, my mentor from graduate school. He was the primary reader for the dissertation. And I asked him, you know, what are some of the most pressing, outstanding issues in Polish-Jewish relations that really haven't had a full-scale monograph? And really his first answer was about the Home Army. And he said that we really don't have. Now, this was in 2003, 2004. Remember, this is before 2005, when the Polish Center for Holocaust Research was established, when Zagłada Żydów had its first issue in 2005. So this is right on the cusp of where there really wasn't much secondary literature yet in Poland or Polish. There were just like polemical accounts in Polish and English and Hebrew and in French, but no actually scholarly work. And so I kind of took up the mantle and said, okay, and I started reading, and I realized how polemical and how kind of like emotional was the issue, and how these two different positions had no bridge. No one had listened to both sides, considered both positions, uncovered, kind of reviewed the evidence, and then tried without a pre-existing conclusion, or, you know, without a hypothesis, to kind of go in and leave no stones unturned and see what would happen without an agenda, I guess. And so that's how, actually, that's the beginning. So once I got, in a way, it was recommended by Polskie, then I started reading up on it, and I became kind of very involved in the topic. Sorry, was the second question? Can you remind me of the second question?
Czy spodziewałeś się, że prace nad tą książką będą trwały tak długo?
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you so much for that question. So let me just say, I did not expect it. You know, probably other scholars had this view, like when you start you finish your first book, and when you start thinking of a second, you start looking at other scholars you admire and think, what is the time between first and second book? And as you know, these vary. Some are extraordinarily prolific, and it seems like, you know, 2 years later they have a book or 3. But then I realized that this could take a while, and as I started the archival research, and it began by I had to get a grant from the Fulbright organization to live in Poland for an academic year, and then I had to have a grant from Oxford, a Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies, to spend at least 4 to 5 months in Oxford, so that I could use the archives of London. I couldn't find a kind of residential fellowship in London, but so I could use the Polish Underground Movement Study Trust, was of course a critical source for documents. So I think it's that full academic year. It's about 10, 11 months, both in Warsaw, the 2004-2005 academic year, then around the spring of 2005 at Oxford, going through daily these records of the Polish Underground Study Movement Trust and the Sikorsky Institute. And from that point on, having thousands of documents, I realized all it did was point me towards other archives and other sources. And I started realizing, you know, this is going to be years, because I have to go through memoirs in different languages. But I also needed to travel to interview. So to give you one example, I meant to give you the example that there were a couple key Jewish members of the Army at Krajowa, who, for example, Stanislaw Liniarski, who lived in London, and we also had others. So I'll just give you one example here. Is this shared? Just want to make sure you can see this. I think you can. So I wanted just to give you a sense that, oh, excuse me. I'm just going to go to. So about Stanislaw Aronson, for example. So I came across his memoir at the Biblioteka Narodowa, and this was very exciting for me because this was in 2004. where I went to request some materials about the Home Army. And just by chance, the librarian said, let me show you something that you may be interested in. And I said, okay. And I waited at this counter, and 10 minutes later, she came back with a memoir by Stanisław Aronson, written in English and submitted one copy only to this Biblioteka Narodowa. I'm like, at the time, I never heard his name and I didn't know who he was. So I start reading through, and again, this was just a point of departure. It's a memoir. He explains that he fled the Warsaw Ghetto in January 1943, that he joined the Polish Home Army. Then he was a part of this elite Ketiv branch, that his command, all about his commander, who knew he was Jewish, and other members of his unit knew he was Jewish. And he mentioned in there that he knows there was anti-Semitism in other places, but in his experience, he did not come across it at any time in the Home Army. So I thought this was a pretty critical discovery for me, because again, I'm trying to explore all the different avenues of research, right? One is Jews in the Home Army, because everybody in the literature is saying, were there Jews in the Home Army? And a lot of people said no, because the Home Army didn't accept Jews. So my first encounter with this problem is that on the one hand, I'm told in the literature, the Home Army didn't accept Jews. Then I come across this memoir of a Jew in the Home Army. So and then what I did is in the manuscript, he left his address. So I wrote to him in Tel Aviv, and he said, sure, come to Israel and you can interview me. So in February 2005, I flew to Tel Aviv, and he invited me to his home, and we spoke for about 3 to 4 hours. He allowed me to tape record the interview, and that became a really important source for my book. And this is my way of kind of discussing this question with you, Martyna, which is that led me to other people. So he said, well, have you spoken to this person who lives in London and this person who lives in Geneva? No. And he would say, well, I can get you in touch with them. So he was able to, kind of give me like a cover letter, and I would write to them and say, is it possible I could come and visit? So I used the opportunity of living in Warsaw for that academic year, and I flew to Geneva, and there I found a Home Army commander who in August 1944 was a tank commander to liberate the last remaining Jewish concentration camp in Genshuvka. And I was able to interview this extraordinary gentleman. And again, it became an important kind of source for me of more and more of these individuals in the Home Army who were acted with dignity, and of course and saved many Jews. So again, this just led me towards interviews with others, and it did require travel. And because I didn't want to leave any stones unturned, they'd say, well, have you read this memoir? Well, this memoir, now I'm back in New York, is like, published in this year and 100 copies, and there's only 4 remaining, and they're in Poland. So again, it would take me time. How am I going to get a copy of this memoir, and asking for photocopies and traveling back? So I would also say that in 2008 and 2009, I returned each summer just to go over the Państwa Podziemne, Army Krajowej. So just to review some 1,200, I'm sorry, the hundreds, I forgot now, sorry, exactly how many Home Army periodicals there were, but there were hundreds of clandestine Home Army periodicals during the war. So I thought it was really important to go through all of those if possible. Again, gleaning them for, did they comment on Jews in 1942, 1943, when there were deportations from ghettos and death camps? Were they commenting? And if so, in what fashion? And I thought that was important to go to the local level and see if there's evidence of sympathy for Jews, or non-sympathy, or sympathy with the Germans, for example. And so again, this would take time. I must say that you also have to take into account that the source for the Prasa Podziemne, which is the underground Polish periodicals, was varied, and it was spread geographically over, I would say, 3 countries and in various places. So Jagiellonian University, of course. Then there's the Archiwum Państwowe, Cracovia, the State Archives in Warsaw. Then there's the Biblioteka Narodowa. Of course, the Library of Warsaw University. Then it turns out that, for example, in California, we have a very important institute there, an archive at Stanford University, the Hoover Institute, that itself has all this material. So you're traveling to California, and then to London, Warsaw, Tel Aviv. So I think that explains why it took starting the research in 2004, 2005 academic year, and it taking, I guess, like you said, 9 years to actually figure out and navigate through all these sources to try to produce a chronological narrative and trying not to miss things, which was difficult.